Hello everyone. In this video we're going to analyze this endgame where white looks like is winning this game because the white king is close to the black pawn. White can capture that pawn, and if white captures that pawn, this game is going to be winning for white definitely, because just by capturing already, white will be on the key squares of the passed pawn that it has. For example, here, what are the key squares of the passed pawn? Two ranks in front of it, and the squares right next to it. So if the white king is able to move on one of those squares, then the passed pawn is going to be able to promote. So the second the white king captures the pawn, already we're on a key square. It means this is winning for white for sure. So for example, if we just make things simple and just move the kings and capture this pawn, now this is very simply winning for white. Here in this position we can just wait for the black king to move, take the opposition. Now the key squares of this pawn are these three squares, right? And the white king moves to one of them, and we will be able to win this game easily and promote with white. We have several videos showing such endgames where we're able to win. Now, going back to the original position, but things are not so simple because black has a weapon that black can use here to try to draw, and it is by trying to sacrifice their rook pawn to change the g pawn to a rook pawn. And when white has a rook pawn, black can try to make this a draw, and it will be possible if black can occupy the f8 square after sacrificing the pawn. If the black king can move to the f8 square, then that endgame is going to be a draw. So for example, if white is not careful and plays a move like king to f4, trying to capture the black pawn. Now, black pushes the pawn. It's important that we push it now. We will see what happens if we push it later. So here, black is going to push the pawn, change the g pawn to a rook pawn, to an h pawn. Of course, nothing else works because black wants to also capture, and if white pushes the pawn, then black is even winning this game. So going back, definitely here white is capturing the pawn, and now white's passed pawn is a rook pawn, which means that if the black king can get to the f8 square, then this is going to be a draw for sure. And let's try to do that. The black king is moving, trying to move to the f8 square. White king is also trying to stop black from doing that, and black was able to get to f8 before white could get to one of the key squares of this passed pawn. This passed pawn is a rook pawn. The key squares for this passed pawn are g8 and g7. If the white king could get there before the black king got to f8, then white was going to be able to win this. But here this is going to be a draw because there's no way for white to continue and win this. Here, if we go back, the last move was king to f8 by black. If the white king moves to h7, that's it. We just can play king to f7, f8, and white will never be able to win this. And if white gives us the chance, pushes the pawn, we can just move also to the corner, and that's also going to be a draw for black. Now, going back, this means that white needs to worry about this pawn sacrifice, because then black has a chance to move to f8 with the king and make this a draw. Okay, but then what should white play? In addition, we said that we need to pay attention to something. If white is trying to get the pawn from f4 and black delays the pawn push, for example, tries to move the king now, and when the white king gets closer to the h pawn and then white pushes now the pawn to h3, but this is not going to be okay because white doesn't have to capture with the pawn and have a rook pawn. Instead, white can simply capture with the king, and this is very easily winning for white, as the white king is already on one of the key squares of the white passed pawn. It's definitely winning for white. So going back, now, what else to play with the white king? How about if the white king tries to stop the black king from moving to f8 early on? For example, moves like king e6 or king f6. But the idea is this will be a waste of move, or even king f6 is going to be a waste of move because black is going to have enough time to move the king closer to f8. Meanwhile, what did white achieve? okay, it's true that for now we are keeping the black king away from f8, but then who's gonna capture the black pawn? Right? Black can simply wait here. The second that the black king the white king decides to move to the h pawn, it's then that black can sacrifice the pawn, and the king is already very close to f8, and it's going to be a draw again. So going back, we can just try this one. Let's say black is waiting here, and let's say here, and when white tries to capture our pawn, it's now that we push our pawn, and again white must capture here, otherwise it's losing for white, and the king already moved to f8. So going back, then what can white play? What white can do is white can try to stay close to f8, at the same time close enough to the h4 pawn. So how can white do that? White can do that by moving the king to f5. Now let's see what's the difference between f4 and f5. It's that if right now the black pawn sacrifices, then the white king is closer to f8 now. Let's say black is trying to move to f8. The white king, is closer to a key square, not f8, but taking away f8 from the black king and moving to the key squares of the white pass pawn. Now, we were able to do this because we were closer to the key square. Now, going back, so we played king to f5, and what if here, instead of pushing the pawn, black decides to move the king? Now we're back to the same position like a while ago. The white king can simply attack the black pawn, and here, of course, if the black king just waits, we can just capture, and we're already on one of the key squares of our pass pawn. And if we go back, instead, if the black pawn captures, we don't have to capture with our white pawn and allow black to move to f8 with the king and take away our key squares g7 and f7 from our king. So instead we can just capture with our king and move to a key square, and this is definitely winning for white.